They rode out along the fence line and across the open pasture land. The leather creaked in the morning cold. They pushed the horses into a lope. The lights fell away behind them. They rode out on the high prairie, where they slowed the horses to a walk, and the stars swarmed around them out of the blackness. They heard somewhere in that tenantless night a bell that tolled and ceased where no bell was, and they rode out on the round dais of the earth, which alone was dark and no light to it, and which carried their figures, and bore them up into the swarming stars, so that they rode not under, but among them, and they rode at once jaunty and circumspect, like thieves newly loosed in that dark electric, like young thieves in a glowing orchard, loosely jacketed against the cold, and 10,000 worlds for the choosing. Welcome back. This is All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy. And if you like what you just heard, if that at all sounds appealing to you, that's the sort of rolling sentences and prose and poetry that is intermingled every so often throughout this book. It's interesting how he hits you with something like that, and then you'll get a page or two of just plain, succinct, just almost laconic sentences. Very, very short. And that's just the mastery of Cormac McCarthy's writing that I find so good. So a little bit about this book is it takes place in 1949. You have a man named John Cole and John Grady Cole, and he is the son of a ranch owner who has just died. In fact, the very first page of the book, I'm not going to spoil anything in this for you. I'm going to only spoil to page 30, and then everything before that I'll talk about openly. After that, I will say I'll keep tight-lipped about. I'll be very careful not to ruin that for you. But I will say this: the book opens and ends with a funeral. That I will say. What's interesting is in the opening of this book, it's his grandfather. And John Cole is standing there at the funeral, and he remarks at his grandfather's body in the casket that he didn't comb his hair that way. And I find that to be kind of symbolic of, you could argue, nostalgia, that he's looking at the past with rose-tinted glasses. I actually believe the opposite is true. I think it's that you look back at the past with an inaccuracy that stops you from seeing the good things about it. And whatever it is, his death represents the passing of an age. So this book takes place in 1949 in San Angeles, Texas, and parts of Mexico. And John Grady Cole and his friend Lacey Rawlins go on an adventure, as you just read in the beginning. There's some symbolism in the first 30 or 40 pages that stuck with me the entirety of the book, that kind of gave me the understanding and idea of what it's about. His parents have just gone, John Cole's parents have just gone through a divorce, and his father's a war veteran. It's 1949, like I said, and his mother is a theater actress, and she's selling the ranch. It's fallen to her. She despises the ranch. She wants nothing to do with it. It kind of comes out that she resents that entire lifestyle and always has. And so John Cole, the son, is trying to get his mom to sell it to him. She won't budge. He goes to the lawyers. They're empathetic to him. They can't do anything about it. And so he doesn't really talk to his mom. And he's not close to his dad, but he has a healthy respect for his father. You can tell that he was closest to his grandfather, who passed away. Now, it's really interesting, the symbolism of this sort of traditionalism and modernism butting up against each other, kind of setting the preface, the prelude to the adventure that they go on. This book is like one part Blood Meridian, one part The Hobbit, and one part Romeo and Juliet. It's an interesting combination, and honestly, I loved every second of it. And I'm going to be thinking about this deeply for the next coming weeks. It's that good. So anyways, after the funeral, he goes to the diner, talks to his father, and then he ends up going to a theater, not a movie theater, but a stage play, like a Broadway play. And his mom is on stage. And so John Cole is kind of watching from the crowd. It's a half full theater, decent sized audience. and his mom's basking in the glory of the crowd, and she represents this sort of modernist figure, this Parisian style of person, and he represents that longing for the inveterate, past. And she goes to the edge of the stage at the end of this play, along with the other dancers or whatever, singers and actors, and they take a bow, and everyone is clapping and applauding them, and then a curtain comes down as if to represent this inseparable gulf between the two of them. He doesn't actually even speak to her. But the fact that John Cole even shows up shows that there's this longing in him for his mother. There's this longing in him for that familial relationship, and everything is getting torn apart from him. The past is just the shifting sands beneath his feet, and he cannot catch his balance. Afterwards, he sees his mom one more time in a hotel room. I'm sorry, in a hotel. He's in a lobby, and he's just learned, kind of from his dad that his mom always hated, wasn't happy with him for a long time, this sort of stuff. John Cole keeps tight-lipped about it. And then he goes to the hotel, and he's in the lobby reading this newspaper, okay? His mom comes out, hanging on the arm of some dude, and they're giggling and laughing. She doesn't notice him, and he doesn't speak to her. He just keeps tight-lipped. Then he goes up to the front desk and asks, "Is there a Mrs. Cole here?" And they say, "No, there's no Mrs. Cole checked in here." It's not a case of mistaken identity. It's that, you know, this man, he paid for this place. This wasn't meant to be on the books, if that makes sense. They're kind of keeping it under wraps. And so it kind of insinuates that there's been infidelity for a long time. She's asked, "Don't, if someone asks for Mrs. Cole, tell them I'm not here," kind of thing. And that leads to more alienation of John Cole. And keep in mind, John Grady Cole he's a 16-year-old boy. He's coming into manhood. He's 16 years old. And Lacey Rawlins, his friend, he calls him partner. Partner? He and Lacey Rawlins, Lacey is 17 years old. There's one more scene of the actual plot I want to discuss. It's kind of symbolic. He runs into his ex called Mary Catherine after he tells his father she broke up with him. And this is all around the same time. He's just concomitant disasters have struck this poor kid. And at one point he talks to her and she kind of says, "Let's be friends." He walks away from her after a very weird and awkward, uh, you've ever had that moment where you shake your ex's hand and it's sort of like you've just redefined the boundaries of the relationship. Weeks prior, you might have kissed or something, and now it's that, it's awkward, it's unnatural. And he remarks on that too, that it's just wrong. And he walks away from her. And Cormac McCarthy writes this. Um, he stood back and touched the brim of his hat and turned and went up on the street. He didn't look back, but he could see her in the windows of the federal building across the street standing there. And she was still standing there when he reached the corner and stepped out of the glass forever. And so there's another one of there's four symbols right there. You know, the glass, the reflection of what was in the past. And even though it's there in front of you, you can't touch it, you can't interact it nor change it. And he walks out of it. He's leaving this behind. And then he goes on his adventure with Lacey Rawlins. And I don't want to go too heavy into the story beyond what I have, except that the story is full of disappointments, victories, insights, wonderful conversations, escapes, chases, and they meet a third companion on the way to Mexico. His name is Blevins, and he's going to be a very peculiar character. I don't really even know how to characterize him because, it's hard for me to even talk about him without ruining the story for you. I just want to leave you with this. I'm going to make this short. I highly recommend this book, and some of the themes in this are wonderful. You know, it's a coming up story, and it's a story of the past and how you can't outrun it. In fact, the final, I won't spoil this. I'll try and read this without. He says it like this. Well, maybe I can't read that to you. I want to read something at the end that just is a perfect summary. This book reminds me of the book of Ecclesiastes in a lot of ways. If I'm just being straight with you, it at times feels very hopeless. At other times feels very hopeful. And they're coming into their identity. They go on a great adventure. Lacey and Blevins and John Cole. They end up at this ranch in Mexico where they find some good work. It's a very wealthy man, a hacendado named, I think it's Don Hector, and then a young woman named Alejandra. And I'm not going to go more into this. I'm just going to tell you that if you at all like poetry, if you at all like just poignant speech, if you're at all into a novel that's going to have you thinking about your life, about your past, about your future and present, and have you really deeply thinking about it, then this is the book for you. I mean, I'm going to cut the review in about 30 seconds here. I'm just going to end it with this. I'm going to tonight, as a result of reading this, and I may have done this anyway, but I'm definitely going to now. I'm going to go on a walk. I'm going to look up at the moon. I'm going to pray. And I'm just going to think about life, my past in particular, things that I wanted that I didn't get, disappointments, things that I didn't know I wanted that I did get, this sort of stuff. It's the type of book that makes you think, that makes you just think. I know I'm being sort of vague, but I don't want to spoil the plot, and I don't want to go too deeply in the plot because I have a way of rambling and going way too long, and no one watches the movie or the movie. No one watches the video then. So I'll cut it here. I highly recommend this book, All the Pretty Horses, Cormac McCarthy. I like it as much as Blood Meridian for different reasons. And it really showcases that he can write something beyond apocalyptic, The Road, No Country for Old Men, Blood Meridian. They're very similar. This has similarities, but it's not that kind of book. It's very different, and I love it. And I'm very, very pleased I read it. So if you're with me at this point, I hope God bless you all, and I hope you have an introspective evening.